Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Wherever you are, it's breakfast somewhere. So eat up. Welcome to Breakfast with Vinny. Food for thought. Give those guys any more beer. All right, man. Oh, man, they love us already. So today's a special day. An old friend of mine that I've reconnected with over the years, who is a great performer, musician, and is now known much more so as an educator. He probably has the most fluid hands that I've seen since I can remember. And I'm very proud and happy to have him on the show today. Please say hello to the great Bruce Becker. Hi, Bruce.
Hi, Vinny. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me, man. Greatly appreciated.
Yeah. This is good, man. So, Bruce, tell me, what have you been thinking of lately in terms of, if you have been, I'm not sure if you've actually been sort of, you and I were talking off the cuff where you were talking about sort of maybe revamping the way that you approach things from an educational standpoint. And I don't know if I remember that correctly, but am I sort of barking up the right tree here?
Yeah, I'm just looking at the way I do it now is one-on-one. I'd like to offer an online resource for people, but do it maybe a little more, some kind of opportunity to meet up, because I think that the interaction is so important. You can be a voyeur and look at things and you might not be interpreting them well. You might not feel as motivated if you're going to talk to somebody about what you're working on to advance your cause. And so for me, it's just something I've been working on. I've been slowly archiving videos and really tapping into, the detail that I already provide for my students. But when you do it in a setting where it's going to be somebody looking at it and not having me maybe sitting there and giving full direction, I wanted to put in that level of redundancy so that it's well stated, because, you could take in one directive, maybe two, but then after going through the material for a little bit longer or a specific exercise, your head will start to expand, your level of equanimity will show up, and you'll start to see, oh, I saw those, now I see this, now I get it.
Right.
And that's increased by my interaction with people to bring it forward. I've had many people through the years of teaching, which is going on 43 now.
Wow, that's amazing. Good for you.
Yeah.
That's wow, that's quite a track record. And you've earned your stripes and not only have the experience to show for it, but the knowledge as well. So but you said something very valuable, where I think in this day and age where we have this sort of one-way thing, where we're watching a video and then we mimic it and somebody says, do this and do that. And we can watch it over and over and over. And they'll say, next week, I'll talk about, how you're going to progress and what the next step is to do and follow this 6-week program. And you could kind of go along with it, but it's not the same as a one-on-one experience whereby you're really connecting with a person's pace. And like you say, giving them the right kind of motivation that they need at the time that they need it. And not only that, but everybody has different kind of modalities of learning. Some people do it better from seeing, some people do it better from tactile things. I mean, at the end of the day, drumming is an immersive experience. You have to do it. But I think that even with the internet meetings that we have now, it's possible to just having that continual one-on-one experience with a teacher that's mentoring someone, or is vastly different than just watching a video over and over. I'm sort of getting that from you as well. I think so.
Yeah. Well, you said something very poignant before, just about like different people process information in different ways. And so my game as an educator has been to kind of focus on bringing about a 360-degree dimensional element to processing the information. Those who are more challenged on the visual coordinates, you need to work with them and establish that, but then you need to really lean into what they're strong with, and slowly bring them around so they have a better perspective of all avenues of what you could do in terms of the learning process. But my game has been, played for a long time. So maybe I take it for granted. I don't think so, because I really try to stay truly in the moment. Like the hour I spend with somebody I'm so immersed in what I'm talking about or what messaging I'm putting forward that, it's really working with that person and trying to transmit that message clearly so that they receive it. Now, I can't sit there and whip them in the butt and get them to practice all the time. That's another skill set that people have to work on to, work on a level of discipline. However that works into your schedule. I always say nothing comes from doing nothing. You can, sit around and will it, but it's not going to happen. You have to sit down, put sticks in your hand, and as painful and excruciating as that can be, because you go, God, I'm so below the level of where I want to be, that just is what it is. I mean, I know from my own experience, I put myself in very painful positions of learning, whether it was like going into the big band where my reading was kind of like just marginal, and then finally getting a clue and going like, dude, you just got to keep your eyes on the paper. Those figures aren't that complicated. Follow along. Because I had those, I had ears. It was interesting. When I was a kid, I could read snare drum literature fairly well. I was not an excellent, but I was a really good reader, and I could do a pretty good job on a lot of that stuff for snare drum. As soon as I was in the big band, looking at, notation that would be maybe even a little simpler, my eyes just closed down and my ears opened up, but I'd never know where the hell I was. And so I'd be listening, frantically going, I don't know, where are we? Where are we? But it was just automatically like my ears just turned on, which of course is a valuable asset, because you got to do the duality. You got to have your eyes on paper just for stop signs and left turns and right turns and U-turns. And you got to have your ears open so that you're playing with people. You're having a communicative experience.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I talked about this in a recent episode, the last episode that I did, The Lost Art of Listening. So you definitely have to do that. And I mean, well, you look at Buddy, he didn't read at all, and his ears and his memory capacity were amazing. So, but when you were talking about, just to backpedal a little bit here, you're talking about, the one-on-one experience. If you had someone there that really, let's say if they came to you and said, look, just hypothetically, I'm really in a rut right now, and I really, really want to get out of this rut. I feel like my playing is stale. What can I do to get out of this rut? Then how would you approach this person? In other words, would you first say, look, would you approach it from a creative angle versus just looking at his hands, or, you know what I mean? His or her hands?
Yeah. I generally just default to, and it is case by case, but I generally would default to, I think in my experience, I would say the massive drummers that have come with me have more technical complaints. That being said, if they did complain about having a creative void or feeling unmotivated or feeling like they've kind of hit a rut somewhere, there's a lot of redundancy in what we do physically. And there is a spark that you can kind of reset if you're working on a different experience with the stick in your hand. Okay. I do have like a lot of things that are what I would call, creative phrasing building blocks. And some of them, I'll just say some of them, because you came from this same template, are based on what Gary Chafee put forward. His material is so deep. My favorite book, of course, is truly the Green Book, the sticking patterns, because that to me was just so brilliant the way he put that together, especially the compound stickings area, where I love his definitions. Stickings A, definition, a single followed by some number of doubles, right? stickings B, two
Yeah,
singles by some number of doubles. So that, that's, it's a paradiddle diddle, or a paradiddle diddle diddle. But he never voices it that way. He never says, oh, well, now you're going to play a paradiddle. Now you're going to play a double paradiddle. And now you're going to play,
exactly.
And I love that, because we need to know the value of those stickings and how they can work. And of course, we start there to develop some level of control and proficiency with the sticks. But when you want to push beyond that, it's not thinking about stickings. It's thinking about, in our limited way, melodic content to what we can do. We don't have 12 tones, so we got to deal with the surfaces that we have and, make the most out of them. Me, I'm a little bit more limited. I used to play a 5-piece kit, 2 up and 1 down, but over the years devolved into this. And it's like, that's my comfort zone. If I think I put that ride tom there, it just kind of interferes with my threshold of drop of where I want to sit with the ride cymbal. But
yeah. But that's enough. I mean, there's a million ways to look at this. Like, well, that's your comfort zone. Well, why don't you get out of your comfort zone? Well, why? And the other thing is that, well, I can turn around and say, well, you got less drums. You should be able to make the same amount of music on less drums, and Gary would talk about those patterns. Guess one thing, because I interviewed Gary and he said all that linear stuff was really about phrasing. So as you well said and echoed, it's, you're not really doing it to think about stickings. So, and I know that I was, myself was very, very rudimentally influenced when I was younger, to the point where it was really tough for me to get out of not thinking in terms of rudimental patterns. I had to force myself to stop thinking about rudimental patterns because I was so ensconced in them. So I get that. And also in terms of, I know I'm bouncing around a little bit, but you really sort of brought a lot of thoughts into my thought stream here. It reminded me of something else that I had mentioned recently, where there's a story about Andy Newmark, and this is what the fable is, that he went into audition for Sly Stone, and there wasn't a drum set there. There was a practice pad, and Andy was like, well, and Sly's response was, if you're funky, you're funky. So there you go. So much for how many drums you have or how many drums you don't have. So
it's rather important that you can sit and kind of play a musical thing on the pad and kind of, play some phrasings that can be, we all should be singing a tune when we're doing that, of course. But, you could sit down and make some music out of just sitting on a practice pad. And I think if you could do that, then absolutely, I could get the point of where Andy was just sitting down and it came across as funky, and Sly just went, there it is. It's right there, right?
Yeah. Well, look at somebody playing a tambourine or a hand drum, or, you know what I mean? There you go. Same thing.
Yeah.
So okay. So that was really great about what you said about, sort of kickstarting someone's creativity to get them out of a rut. Now, if you were just, on the other hand, if someone came to you and said, look, I'm really frustrated with my technique. My hands hurt, and they get really stiff, and sometimes they bleed, and this, that, and the other thing. Then I know this is on a case-by-case basis, but is there any sort of knee-jerk thing that you would say to them in terms of, okay, what's the first thing I'm going to address here is relax, or where's your fulcrum, or, what is, are there any kind of, universal keys that might open up doors where you get the person thinking about what it is that they're doing. You know what I'm saying? Instead of just sort of, some people just go, oh, okay, I'm watching you and I'm trying to copy, but it's not, I'm not feeling it, like, whereas, another teacher might say, no, I'm going to explain this to you so that you can integrate it. I mean, that was kind of a long question there, but I think you understand what I'm going with.
Absolutely. No, yeah. I think in regards to, developing hand technique, you could sit and have your hand in a nice shape and go, just hold the stick like this. And then that guy, tries to shape his hand like that, and all of a sudden the springs just go blamp, and they go back into, their holding mechanism to hold the stick. And it's like they've got already like neural transmitters that have been wired and conditioned to, when they pick up drumsticks and play music, your hands are just going to reflexively go there. So what I do is I have specific pressure points and values of letting go and feeling the swing of the stick and all that stuff. And that takes a moment to process because it's new. It's like one of my patented statements would be, it's counterintuitive for drummers to let go. They want to hit, kick, punch, and just nail that drum set. And at the end of the day, you want to create a fluidity of motion like a dancer and impart that element into their playing to change what they do, to restructure what they do. So, in my experience, when I get somebody going in, and I started the French grip because it's truly like the last frontier. The stick is just delicately seated in the last joint. Okay, if we went to a what do you call it, osteo guy, he would say like, that's the first joint. I always just default to my nomenclature: base joint, middle joint, last joint. Well, you want to sit in there with the thumbprint on top, and that's based on the French timpanous grip. And it does not include cradling the stick, because if you cradle the stick like this and your thumb's up and you start hitting a surface, you're going to choke the wood. So if you can let it bounce and swing and work within the confines of molar and all those elements, it's not a speed thing. It's about really just kind of retooling the finesse, feeling the balance and the swing of the stick. You get a few of those things together and feel some of the pressure points that you want to adhere to so that you have a little bit more of a breathing factor inside your hand, feel the pliability of the stick movement. It'll already impact whatever it is you're doing. And then I would go into more of the German things where speed and finesse is really going to be detailed and brought forward to add to your arsenal of goods to move around the kit. And, that also, with the French grip, it also includes like movement, because you're not playing on one surface. You're not going da 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 in a German position, and you're not just sitting in only a French grip position. And you can look at a lot of people and go like, yeah, but that guy does. I'm not interested in what that guy does per se. We can copy him, but that's like going like, geez, I love that guy's suit and I love his shoes, but yet he's got like what would you say, a size 12 shoe, and he's 6'3", and you're 5'9", and you wear a size 10. Doesn't fit. You can't do that. You're not that guy. You can take the elements and the vibe and the characteristic, but you got to kind of bring it into your own sphere of, working it and find the you in what you do. So,
right. Okay. Well, so I'm sorry to interrupt, but this is really bringing a lot of things, like the idea of that we're all built differently. It's funny. I'm contradicting my own sort of, tenet of, you can only talk about drums so much because it's an immersive experience, but, principle wise, we're really getting somewhere here. And, we're all built differently, but we all adhere to the same sort of, ergonomic principles and principles of physics. So regardless of the fact that one person is really tall and slender and has really long arms versus someone else who, let's say, is really short and kind of chubby and has little fingers, they're still obeying the same kind of ergonomic principles, are they not? And,
yes.
Aren't they just condensing, like, in other words, you still have the same kind of physiological movement, but if you're, my camera can't zoom. I only have one camera here. You know what I'm trying to say? It's like, it's like you're just going to condense your movement if you have shorter arms, or, you know what I mean? And also, I'd like you to pick up and expound on that if you don't mind. And also, the idea of moving around. Some people say that, moving around the kit, some people are like, just keep your hands in a stationary position if you're playing sort of American grip or German grip. And others will sort of say, well, you're going to swivel and your hands are going to swivel as you're moving around the kit. And I want to get your thoughts on those two things: the basic ergonomics and the principles of physics that we all have to obey as drummers, regardless of our stature, and also moving the hands from, in terms of a kind of an arc, in a pitch and a yaw kind of thing, So,
Yeah. So physics are physics. They never change. Gravity is gravity. If I drop this stick 100 times, it's going to fall. I want to get really a great relationship with the weight value of the stick. So that may be a little bit, again, counterintuitive for somebody because they're conditioned to kind of strike and hit, but you can let go. Everybody's got a hinge in their elbow. They've got a wrist. So all those nuances are, the subtlety of the different physiological frames that you're working with, right? The different cast of characters that I work with, very tapped into how they're moving. I can see the slightest bit of a shoulder drawn in or a tension or the way they're positioning their elbow so that they're not maximizing the ergonomic of the stroke that you're looking for. So that's just my conditioning of like observation skills and working with people on that level. But regarding like getting around the kid and ergonomics of the fluidity, coming from the Freddie Gruber background, mostly, I would say there's other people that I had good input from, whether it was Jimmy Chapin or my mallet teacher at Cal State Northridge, Karen Irvin. The fact is that if you're in a palm down position, which would be, the bang for your buck on the snare drum, if you come out to the floor tom, path of least resistance, bop, right there to the French grip position. So I just want to work on basically taking an element of letting my fingers reflexively open to accommodate that French grip position. And as I always say, on a floor tom, which is a very flappy surface, you don't get a big rebound out of it or get a reliable rebound. You are the director of the energy. So you got to get in there and feel that bounce and move with that stick effectively to draw upon the efficiency that you're after. So,
right.
those factors are all important. There's, factors of seating posture that I think are rather important. I'm very strong on, and I've done, a lot of research. It's not like I just come up with this yesterday and it goes like this. There's a lot of me investigating and doing things. First and foremost, I sit higher. And the reason I do is I want to sit on top of the drum. But second, if I do lift up my thigh to drop and pop and let my ball of my foot roll over the pedal to produce the beater ball to pop off the head, my ankle is loose. But I can feel my body weight. That's a factor. I can use that as an inner feel to my motivating time. When you feel like a stride, well, that helps to confidently put time in a certain place, all those movements. So other thing that's a factor is a solid drum throne that's not going to roll, spin, or rock, because when I do shift my weight to the right and the seat does spin or it's unstable, that creates a destabilization to the true axis of my full body weight. Get to the bottom of it. So, Freddie would always say, Bruce, get to the bottom of it, man. Bottom of the time. So if you see time as an elliptical or rotational kind of a, arc, or however you want to call it, orbit is what I wanted to say. You could see that there's a bottom to everything we do. You don't have to go through the surface. You come to the surface. And if you can work with that, now you're talking. So, those little attributes of weight, positioning of height, where you sit on the ride cymbal, it's personalized. I can't say that it's one size fits all, because there are guys who feel comfortable with that ride cymbal a little bit up. You still want to have access to the weight, perhaps. I would find it very tedious to sit up here on the shoulder with real raised ride cymbal. But if that's a vibe and a nuance and an attitude of your expression that you want to put in there, all right. I would say, what's the difference? If you don't know the difference, come back and just experience a little of that so you can have a better, valid choice. You can sit down and go like, I tried that other way and I really gave it a good shot. Feel comfortable here. Great. Then live there. That's fine. Just know that you got to work in that setting then,
Yeah. And the other thing though is if you're playing up there, and you tell the person, well, just try it the other way. And you would hope that they would feel the amount of strain that it takes to keep your arm up that, you know what I mean? I think that there's probably a way to do it where if you were playing that way and the cymbal was, you could probably do it and position it in a way where your elbow doesn't have to go up that high. But most of the time, and I, I was guilty of this back in the 80s, like, having the cymbal in such a position that my elbow was raised, and I think it takes a toll on you after a while. It takes a toll on your shoulders and all of that sort of stuff. But you were getting into the conceptual thing about time as well. And when you said the one thing about Freddie, even before, I think it was before you even spoke about Freddie, you said like a dancer. And to me, that's, you and I connected when I messaged you, and I was like, you showed that clip of Freddie and he was like a dancer, and Freddie didn't play that much. He instead demonstrated movement. And a lot of people would sort of, try to bag on Freddie and this, that, and the other thing. And I would think, and you got to, just sit on your monkey mind and your thought for a second before you do that, because you're missing something very valuable. And I, for one, couldn't understand how somebody could not see Freddie trying to demonstrate wrong and then doing the whole dancer thing and showing that as being the natural way to play. I mean, he didn't have to play a groove. He didn't have to play time. He didn't have to really play anything. All he had to do was showcase the movement. And he was like Fred Astaire, you know what I mean? And so a lot of people miss that stuff, but I think that, and for me, just hearing that one word, like a dancer, what does that even mean to you? I mean, if your idea of dancing is some kind of jerked movement, then you wouldn't be able to have any kind of epiphany from hearing that word. But for me, maybe it's because I'm older and I think of in that context, but I would think that anybody would be able to sort of put two and two together in that way and get that. But it's surprising how many people don't. And that, to me, when you said that tells you pretty much everything,
I agree. I think, you can sort of put two styles of dance inside what we do with sticks, and you could say as a tap dancer or a ballet dancer, because there's some times where you have some nice lofty lifts, and there's sometimes where you're down getting inside and lifting up and down. And
yeah,
so
but even as a tap dancer, you notice how relaxed they are, and the hands are sort of flopping along at the sides, and it's just like it's just kind of happenstance almost. It looks like, it almost looks throwaway. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And if you think about the type of phrasing like the Nicholas brothers were doing back in the day, it's kind of the phrasing of like what, Joe Jones and Buddy Rich and Chick Webb and all those guys were doing. It was that was the rhythmic composure of what those guys were doing at that particular time. So it just makes sense that there was a coordinated thought process. I don't know what those guys talked about because I wasn't there, but I'm sure there was a validity to that. Buddy was a tap dancer. Louis Bellson was a tap dancer. I think even Joe Jones might have been. But nonetheless, I'm sure they all had a quality of
Steve Gadd.
Yeah, exactly. Steve Gadd. Yeah. They all had a quality of that understanding, and that conceptually, I think, really builds into a different mode of delivery and thought processes to how you can play time. So, but
excellent.
Yeah. But going back to, like just the ergonomics and everything, I was just going to say, I've had guys who play up here and they complain about a shoulder issue. And I go, well, why, come on down, and play right here. And feel how this feels dropping to this threshold where you feel the bottom of that stroke where your elbow can kind of lock and you can drop into it. Again, it just requires a little bit of a level of introspection. And I think I was thinking back to you, Vinny, when you played the early days, you were sitting like a foot and a half off the floor, right? Really low. When did you notice, and when did you start to change in terms of that seating posture?
Well, it was funny because I did that originally, and it felt like I had everything tilted in a certain way where I was sort of like boxing the drums, and I was playing in such a way that, sort of, you can see this in the camera, like sort of like this, and but then one day I was playing at a club in LA, and I felt good after the first set. Everything felt good. And then I went to get up during the break, and it was really tough. All of a sudden I had this pain in my lower back, and I went, whoa. And at that moment I was like, I got to change this. So I started coming up little by little.
Right.
And the thing is that the whole thing of seating, now, I'm sort of in a position where it's like my, it's not 90 degrees. It's like tilted. It's down a little bit.
You have a slight slope towards the knees.
Yeah, exactly. So that's kind of where I'm at now. But I've seen, Buddy sat really high, and I've seen people sit. So Tony sat high. Some people sit
Alvin Jones.
High. Yeah, to the point where it's like they're just leaning back on something, and it's like, okay, I never really got to that level of comfort with that, but to be fair, I haven't really tried it, but I didn't feel like I had a solid footing. That's just me. But again, I guess you have to almost try everything, really, to a certain extent, to find out what it's really like. Not bad things, but good things, and things that you think might help. But that's what happened with me. And but the other thing is that you were talking about getting to the bottom of it.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting because a great composer and arranger I was doing a concert with, and he said, you playing up kind of high, and I see these other guys playing down low. Why is that? I'm like, well, because I play traditional grip. And so, it's interesting because like Buddy sat up high, but his snare drum was high because he played traditional grip. So a lot of traditional grip players, you almost have to have your snare drum higher,
or you get this.
Yeah, you can't have that. No. Right. But now Tony, he went back and forth, but he did it in such a way where the snare drum was high enough for him to be comfortable with traditional grip, and then his elbows would go out and he'd play matched, and he kind of figured it out where he got a common ground with it. And I figured that one out too for the most part, but I never really, I don't think not nearly as much as he did. I just think that, but you know what? Here's the other thing though. Freddie, going back to Freddie here, I'll never forget where he would always say, this, let me see if I can get it in the frame. This is this.
Mm-hmm.
Is this. And so it made a ton of sense to me. And it also made a ton of sense when it came to trying to get, like sort of power with a backbeat. And, my friend would call it locked and long. And Tony did that too. And so that way, the whole arm motion really was sort of very similar. If you just turned it around and did this, you could see that.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
So it made a ton of sense to me.
I would draw the case of like, just in terms of hand position, just how you're housing the stick. If I take my German position and notice how my thumb's drawn in, now it's not always going to flex in, but that's one of the pressure point values. If I'm here and if I'm in French, that thumb would still be in. And if I'm in my traditional grip, my thumb would still be drawn in. Those are some commonalities. And you were talking about the height of the snare drum regarding being in a traditional grip position. Absolutely. If I'm teaching, which I do teach, I don't play traditional grip outside of brushes. And I tried like a madman to go and really work on a match grip approach to brushes because I play everything match grip. It just doesn't work. So there's a natural effect that I grabbed from traditional grip that allowed me to feel time in a nice circular kind of a painting style. But if I'm teaching, I've got to raise everything so that I'm not hunched over and doing this. For optimum position, I have a different threshold to work with. And so,
right.
and I did study like a fair amount of time with Freddie for the traditional grip. And then I remember my head was going to blow up, because if I pulled out my Buddy Rich book and my Burns and Mallon book and the detail that we were going through of the building blocks, as Freddie, at the time I studied with him, I would say that was his height. He lived at that little house on Etiwanda. He'd kind of found a pretty good stride. You know, he was still Freddie and worked on Freddie time in most cases, but he had a pretty detailed way, at least for me. And I studied with him, I think, long or longer than most people would. And he would like kind of try to shake me off his tail, but he'd find some different elements, not just hands now, conceptual ways of bringing more to what the instrument has. You know, the hands are, of course, a big part of it, but, you know, so conceptual ways of playing time and working that. But so with the traditional grip, I went maybe about 6 or 8 months, and I finally looked at him and I said, I got to tell you, man, I'm a match grip guy. And he looked at me in his Freddie way and he kind of went, okay, you know, kind of dejected. But you know what? I compartmentalized all that stuff. I had a really good headspace for recall. And when I took a position in 1994 at this now defunct school in Vienna, Austria, where I taught there for a year, I knew that when I was heading in to take that position, I had about 3 months to prepare, that there were going to be guys that wanted traditional grip breakdowns. And so I just sat and kind of did my recall and practiced all that stuff. And all of a sudden it just started to work, because I think of all the detail that I had from my match grip, you know, kind of work together. And I could see, if I'm doing that molar thing this way, I got that. Or if I'm doing like a double stroke, slower motion double stroke, I could see how I could use the cradle position versus the index finger. And all of a sudden, my head was filled with a lot of entertaining ideas, you know, to put that together. But again, it was a good, I would say that 1 year that I taught there, Vinny, was like 7 years of intensive teaching, because I was there 6-7 hours a day. That's where I met Jojo, because he was already well known in Europe. And when we met, the couple of times he came in as sort of like a resident teacher, we hit it off very well. I actually hooked him up with Freddie a few years later, because he was interested in studying with him. And it just felt like a really productive thing. And then I realized at the end of that, I went like, okay, that was cool, but what's the Groucho Marx line? I would never want to be a member of a club that would allow me as a member. I ventured out into my own territory as a teacher. I just felt like I was unbound. I had my own, you know, what I would say, nomenclature or ways of talking about things. I didn't have to adhere to any, you know, somebody shaking their finger at me. Oh, don't do it that way. We do it this way. And it's allowed me to kind of, where I did have rigid ideas and was somewhat, you know, locked in a box a little bit, it allowed me to stretch beyond and see like, oh yeah, you know, that is okay. Okay, maybe if it's supplemented with a little bit of this, you can go there, just as long as you don't get stuck in that little cul-de-sac and you can't come back to here, you know. So in other words, certain fundamentals that you want to have at your disposal.
Yeah. That's makes a gang of sense. Yeah. So, you know, but the other thing about a traditional grip is that, you know, do you, I mean, I personally, I don't know if you have noticed this, but do you find that it sort of, I don't know if it causes you to think different, but it just does. Is you just think differently with traditional grip. I think that it does that. And I don't think it's a bad thing. I am going to put this addendum of a value judgment on it. Yes, I think that's good. I think it's good because it causes you to think differently. And for me, you know, my opinion on this is that it kind of it forces you in a sense to recognize the left and right hand differently, whereby they're playing different roles. And I don't think that that's necessarily a constricting kind of a thing. But yeah, do you find that it causes you to think differently?
Yeah, absolutely. But again, I worked so hard on just like replicating things that I would think about in traditional grip for match grip jazz playing. However, you're right. It does have a different sensibility. It's just, my problem with that I felt so challenged to get around the kit, and the fluidity that I had in my match grip approach was just so far advanced that it was hard for me to try to even fathom like trying to catch up. And, you know, when I hung with Jimmy, because I hung a lot with Jimmy Chapin, he would always say in his inimitable way, if I was a young player today, I would play the match grip and I'd play open-handed. And I'd say, yeah, I gotcha. I mean, open-handed for me, I've had guys who try to do that, but, you know, if you're right-handed, I don't know if you can ever really get that left hand to feel the same way. I think maybe there's a few cases where we could say, well, that guy did or that guy did. But in general, work with your strengths. You know, work with your. Yeah. I try to build upon certain literature where there's one book that I'll use some etudes out of. It's called The Contemporary Percussionist by Charles Memphis, and there's no stickings in there. And so I'll give building blocks to see notation and recognize what you could do with that notation. And oftentimes I'm not really trying to pursue, well, let's do everything alternating strokes because that's the best way. I'll do that with other exercises, but I'll go, you know, this is also not only an etude for your reading, but there's some phrasing nuggets in there you can fine tune. So go with your strengths. Because if you were on a gig, you're not going to go like, well, I got to play that fill left-handed because, you know, I got to learn things. No, you got to deliver the goods with your strengths.
Yeah. And some of the greatest from different disciplines, you know, minds and voices of all times have echoed that. And that's not to demean the whole concept of open playing and what it can do for you and how it can open you up and all that sort of thing. But I think Miles Davis even said that about play your strengths, if I'm not misquoting him. Or, you know, it has been said of Bruce Lee, the late Bruce Lee, that, you know, when push came to shove, that he would always lead with the straight right blast.
Right.
You know, even though he was into sort of being ambidextrous and you know, and was very, very open, you know, when he had developed his own style called Jeet Kune Do. He you know, his thing was like no style, you know.
No, exactly.
But again, you know, when push came to shove. So we are going to default to something that will reveal what our dominant pattern is. Right? I mean, is that?
Yeah, you know, I mean, you know, conversationally, if you were like a guy like at a party and meeting up with somebody and they just kept throwing out non sequiturs of like thousands of different topics, your head would be spinning going, what? You know, you tap into your strengths and kind of speak from that vantage point and kind of work from those areas. You know, you stretch slowly to get that other stuff going. But, you know, in the true spirit of investigating the different dialectical nuance to different styles, I always see it as like language. You know, if you were to say like, okay, well, jazz could be like, you know, the Dutch language. And then you go like, how many dialects are there in the Netherlands and in the Flemish part of Belgium? Wow, it's amazing because I lived there. And I remember watching a program, like one of those like 60-minute style programs. And this guy went and interviewed some farmer guy who was just like, you know, 20 miles outside of Antwerp, Belgium. And they're running the show in subtitles. And I looked at my ex-wife, I go, what's with the subtitles? I can't understand a word that guy said because the dialect was so different. So, you know your dialects, get in there and find your nuance in that arena. And you try to expand that to fulfill maybe a larger landscape of what you could do as a player. But, you know, if your passion is to do that one thing and you do it great, do it. Go that way. You got to live in your, you know, your level of passion. You don't want to just find yourself doing things just to do it and then kind of be moaning and bitching about it. And go like, oh, like I would do a lot of cover gigs and I'd hear guys on the bandstand go occasionally, if I have to play Brown Eyed Girl one more time, and they go, well, then don't do the gig. Why are you here? Don't complain. If I mean, it's a cool groove. It was a great hit. It's got a great spirit. People enjoy it. You know, put yourself behind it. If you can't, because, you know, in our sphere of what we do, in some context, you could also cast yourself as a character actor brought in to perform a certain role. And you want to bring the highest level of intensity to that role of what you do. I mean, I don't know, you've done thousands and thousands of sessions. I'm sure, you know, you've been asked to do things where you're going, okay. Got to get in there and got to like really put it out in this, you know, certain attitude. Maybe they're asking a certain element out of you, right?
Well, this is all very loaded stuff. Absolutely. And I mean, I could take three different things and just run with it, and we could talk for another hour on just that. First of all, yeah, bloom where you are planted. Secondly, I've come to the conclusion myself over the years that, I used to think that, if you had to, in order to be really considered to be great, you've got to play all these styles. Now, I did that because I like a lot of different kinds of music, but it's like, well, what if, you get to a certain point and you're like, well, do you play punk? And you don't have to sit there and say, yeah, I can do that. It's not about trying to this macho thing. It's like, well, what if look, you're a grown up. You don't have teen angst anymore. You got adult angst. It's a little different, isn't it? Right.
Yeah.
And so, I've come to the conclusion now that, for me anyway, that, being great is not idiomatically dependent. If you just play one thing, one style, okay, you can be great. You don't, but we've sort of come to this thing where, well, you can't be a specialist. You got to do everything now, and you got to wear 200 hats because we've entered the era of the solitary musician in a lot of ways, and social media and the attention economy and all that, blah, 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 blah. But yeah, just use your strengths and in terms of the acting aspect of it, yeah, I guess you could say that in a grand sense, being a studio musician is kind of like being an actor. And the dialect thing was very important, what you said. There's a gazillion different dialects in Italy. I'm Italian American, right?
That's right. That's right.
That's heritage. Yeah. There's a gazillion different, people from, the North might have a hard time understanding people from Naples. They make up their own words just about. So, and on that note, I've seen criticism come to people who were very good players that played a variety of styles of music. And let's say they were playing like a Latin tune on a session. And someone would say, they should have got so-and-so, he's from there. He would have played it, but, and all this sort of thing. And it's like, well, I think that's selling people short, because you could turn around and say, well, yeah, but he's from that district. And who's to say that, somebody from the neighboring town would turn around and say, no, you don't understand that, so to get in, involved in that kind of polemic over that sort of stuff is like missing the point, really. And it really, it doesn't help you to sort of really get inside the music more, what I'm saying, to understand it on that big conceptual level.
I had a guy who, I'll just keep the names out of it, just not to unveil anybody's personality, but this guy called me up and wanted to know about like my studies with Freddie, and he started to go in about Steve Gadd, and he said, well, Steve Gadd doesn't play Latin the right way. And I was like, what? And I said, okay. No. But I said, that's whether that's, your perspective or not, it has nothing to do with the depth of feel and expression that Steve puts forward with those pieces of the words and vocabulary. It's just, I just couldn't believe that he was missing on the feel value, because as I always say, when you watch Gadd play and he's just sitting down, like I'd watch him at a clinic or whatever, and he starts out with his groove and you're going, all right, it's Steve Gadd. And then within about like 90 seconds, he's dug a 7-foot trench that he's sitting in with the feel so below the earth, you're going like, what? Wow. And it's like, how do you kind of get into a place of like, well, he's not playing the right vocabulary for that. That's not, listen, the greatest jazz musicians in the world use Steve Gadd for their records because of his ability to make it feel a certain way and really bring the essence forward. So,
something, that's right. Something, he did that thing several years ago with Giovanni Hidalgo. Now, you didn't see Giovanni Hidalgo complaining about him, did you?
No,
of course not. So there you go. Or, I'm sure that they could have thrown the idea of the project to Giovanni, and you didn't see him saying, oh no, I'm not going to do it with him. You know what I'm saying? So these critics, And these armchair Napoleons are saying that kind of stuff. And it's like, well, they didn't complain. You are. And yes, we have freedom of speech, and that's great. And we can agree to disagree. That's okay too. But it's like, okay, then show us how it's done.
Right.
Show us how
what's your body of work? Where are you coming from? You know, so I mean, at the end of the day, you know, when you look back at all the great jazz musicians, what did they do? They absorbed, you know, the predecessors' vibes and then what was going on currently, and they kind of brought it into their version of that. Alvin Jones didn't play like, you know, a Cuban guy. He played how he played. His Latin grooves felt like jazz feel, but boy, did they burn, man, in the depth of that. And the depth of Art Blakey or the depth of Roy Haynes or Billy Higgins. I mean, that stuff was just like so well crafted. You go, man, that's ridiculous. So
yeah, and that's how we cross-pollinate with each other as well. And you know, everybody learns from everybody. I mean, I remember someone talking about this group. I think it was from the Congo, and they you know, they were playing this really funky stuff and from all these homemade instruments that were made out of just sort of leftover parts, you know, and someone said, so who are you guys' big influence? And they said, James Brown. You know what I mean? So talk about cross-pollination.
Yeah, man.
There you go.
And I mean,
they love James Brown. You know what I mean? They're not thinking, oh, you know, well, we're never going to play like that because we're not from Detroit or where, you know, some kind of silly stuff like that. How can you open yourself up to music, you know, and learn anything if you're going to think that way? It's just counterproductive.
No, you just got it. Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's just, again, going back to what you said before, the humbleness. I was going to ask you a question because I had heard this before. I think I had heard that, you know, if Jeff didn't feel like he was the right guy for a session because it didn't kind of feel like he could pull it off and make it what it was, wouldn't he recommend somebody else, Jeff Porcaro? And he would say,
absolutely.
Like, yeah, no, I'm not the right guy. Call that guy. You know, I mean,
he did it to friends of mine that I know, and he did it to me. One time he called me up and he said, hey, I got a session. I can't make it at A&M. It was called A&M then. It was Henson Studios now. And then my drums are down there. Can you just show up? It's Stan Getz, you know, stuff like that, you know, and or I got a gig at the Spud. I can't do it. Can you do it? He would just do that stuff. Yeah, he was that guy. He didn't have an ego. He didn't care. He loved everybody. He in his mind, and rightfully so, there's room for everybody. Now, you know, that could be argued nowadays by people saying, and you know, I myself would even say that, you know, oh well, you know, Economics 101 will say things like, you know, there's too many players and not enough gigs. And there is a truism to that now because of just the shift in how music has been distributed. However, there's still room for everybody. And Jeff knew that. And he let everybody blossom. And he was the first guy to you know, toot your horn and help you out. He was that guy. There's none like him. I mean, that guy had a heart of gold. I love him dearly and I miss him so much, you know, so. Yeah, he was that guy. And you know who else is like that? Steve Gadd. Steve is a sweetheart, man. Steve doesn't do that stuff either. So isn't that funny that these guys are the greatest guys and the greatest players, man, and they just don't have that thing. They don't have that kind of an attitude. You know, they're open and their hearts are full of love.
Mm-hmm. Exactly, man.
You know?
Yeah. That's I don't know. You know, I'll just tell you a funny story because you talked about, you know, a lot of people in the room. My brother was a budding guitar student at MI when it was just GIT and BIT. There was no drum department. Right. And he said that Joe DiOrio, who my brother became very close with, was telling him about Joe Pass came in to do a workshop and there's like 80 guitar players. And he looked over at Joe Pass, looking over at Joe DiOrio, and he goes, hey, man, where are all these guys going to work?
No, that's funny. I mean, even then, when there were tons of gigs,
right? Of course. You
know, to hear that from him, coming from him, then is almost, it's funny, doubly funny because of that reason. I mean, there were guys in clubs playing in clubs back then, were buying houses, and
Oh yeah, man. Oh yeah.
I remember Tommy Tedesco, the story where somebody asked him, I think it was Tommy Tedesco, where they said, "Oh, how do I get in the studios?" And he said, "Find a place to park." But yeah, and but I even think now that the role of the studio musician is changing so much, but that's a whole other thing. If you were going to talk to a non-drummer, here's a curveball about drums, and they suddenly expressed interest in drums, and you just had to sort of, take up the slack in the conversation and tell them about the drums. And what would you say to a non-drummer who expressed interest in the drums? This is kind of one of those weird questions.
Yeah, if and I would just say, like it's a physical instrument, so no doubt you want to have a technical.
What does it mean?
Yeah, you want to do a technical facility, and then you'd say like, okay, so what's your passion? What do you like to listen to? And you could start there and have a conversation about the music they're listening to, and maybe dial into what the drummers are doing and kind of ascertain a little bit about, what they're hearing, Because I remember it was such an amazing moment when I was like 16 or 15, which, is interesting because I played in a concert band so I could hear music, but like to listen to Bad Company when I was 15 or 16, kind of sitting on my bed, nodded out on smoking some weed or whatever, and going like, "Oh my God, I can hear Boz Burrell's bass. Wow, what a cool bass line," So I would just ask them like, "What do you hear in there? What are you able to hear what's going on?" And try to bring forward like, what are the patterns? I've had people who
Right.
didn't have very much experience come to study with me, and I would say, okay, let's kind of find a little balance. Let's go with your passion. Let me help you work on some tunes, because that's what older people would want to do. Like I've had some older women who've studied with me, or older guys, and they didn't have much experience or experience at all. And I go, well, let's start there so we can just kind of tap into where you're coming from, and let me help you work on that. Well, I had a lady who never played drums, and then shortly after I got her involved in this guy who does workshops out in Van Nuys. And she joined, and they did like 8 or 10 weeks of rehearsal. Then they do a performance, and she'd come back like white as a ghost. Like, they want me to play a shuffle from Stevie Ray Vaughan. Like, okay, well, here's how we can get through it. You're not going to maybe be able to do the left hand, but if we work on this technical exercise, maybe we can get there. But in the meantime, here's something you can do to kind of hold it together and make it feel good. And
right. Okay.
You're talking to somebody who has no experience, and they're, looking at the drums as an instrument or whatever, these are things I would probably try to bring up and tap into where they're coming from as best I can. But, I've had other people just say, "Wow, drums, that's so cool." And you go, yeah, it's cool. It's just, it's a lot of, I always consider myself like the guy who just, worked really diligently, kept sticks in my hand. And then all of a sudden you go like, "Oh, wow, I've made some progress. What's the equation?" Oh, you practice, you get good, So
Yeah.
you got to tell somebody that too, because a lot of people who give up quickly think that like people just pick up the drums and they're like swinging around like Buddy Rich in a month. It doesn't go like that. So you have to bring a reality check to what's going on. If you want to work on an instrument, you're passionate about it, enjoy the experience of learning.
Yeah, exactly. The joy is in the process, as my old friend Ellen Pascal would say. Wrote a tune called "The Joy is in the Process," and I say that all the time as well. It's all process, and when you want to learn, it won't be a chore. You'll apply yourself, and when you have a good teacher, then they will help you to get through those bouts of, all that sort of frustration and all that. But so is there anything that you want to impart, Bruce, of what's next for Bruce Becker, or do you just want to sort of, keep us in suspense?
No, no suspense. I'll reveal. I turned 65 a few days back, and my goal, thank you. My goal is to reclaim a little bit more of my time. I'd really like to archive what I do and have some kind of an approach where I can take a little more time. I'd love to get back and play. And, in our reacquainting with each other, where we hooked up again, you had recorded on my brother and I's our second record at Castle Oak Studio. Ken Kelly producing. Michael Arvald was the second engineer. Jimmy Johnson was the bass player. And we also had Jim Donica play with you on Central Park West. But as I look back to the things I did with my brother for 35 years and 10 records, I want to go back and revisit that and get out and just do it my way. So David and I haven't really worked together in, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years now. And I just want to get in there and get a quartet, kind of bring that forward. I keep thinking, like, what would I do musically? And I go back, well, that's what I really tried to build my vocabulary off on, and what David presented me as music. And so my plan is to get back out and try to find a little bit of an interval of playing, if it's once a month or once every couple months, but just to enjoy that experience. Because you look back at what you did, and sometimes, you know, you're so angst ridden when you're doing it. You're going like, okay, what's next? What's next? What's next? You know, and you're not thinking about, hey, man, enjoy this experience now. So as you get older and you look back and you're looking back at your, you know, your steps that you've taken, I just want to go back and go like, geez, I really love that music. How would I reinterpret it? And if I can find the right cast of musicians to work with, that would be one thing I'll look to do. So it would be, you know, the teaching thing will continue, but I want to try to find a little bit of a different stream of putting that out there, getting out there and playing. And then I have 2 small kids. You know, I'm an older dad. I've got a boy who's going to turn 8 and a daughter who's going to turn 11.
Congratulations again.
Thank you. My son, you know, being born later in life has been a joy, also a challenge, because he's on the spectrum, but he's super high functioning, super smart. We got him in what they call ABA therapy very young, when he was 2. So he's made like just amazing progress. But if you ever need, and you don't have Google Maps, and you need him to get you around the valley, he'll tell you to get anywhere. He took me to a friend's house that they were having a pizza party at. And it's like, you know, about 7 miles from here in Woodland Hills, or 6. And he's like, okay, Papa, turn right on Victory. Okay, all right. Okay, where now, Tommy? Go take a left on Corbin. I'm like, okay. And he's like telling me how to get there. He's got amazing, like, unbelievable visual map. Now he's with yoga. He knows all the, not all, but he knows the asanas. He knows their names, you know. He just like comes up with weird stuff. I go like, how do you know that? Like he's a real, like, with civil rights stuff. Like he's talking about this one lady who went to school. I don't even know her name, who went to a school, was a African-American, went to school, blah, blah, blah. And he's like, and Papa, she's 4 years older than you. I go, what do you mean? She was born in 1955. And I'm like, okay, dude, ask him when Mozart was born, or when Mozart died, or when Mozart wrote the Requiem, or when he wrote Eine kleine Nacht music. And he knows it. He's got all that stuff. So
wow. It's incredible. It really is mind-boggling to witness that. That's amazing. That's amazing, Bruce. Well, man, oh man, what a blessing, and happy birthday. So,
oh, thank you, man. Thank you. Yeah.
Oh man, I'm gonna have to put that in my calendar so I don't miss it. You know. So, Bruce, I just, again, you know, you have social media presence, I'm sure. You're on Instagram. I'm sure if people just put your name in, Bruce Becker, right? At Bruce Becker?
Bruce Becker, yeah. If you go to Facebook, I have like Bruce Becker Drums or something like that. And Instagram, Bruce Becker Drums, and, you know, YouTube channel.
You have a website?
I have a webpage, just brucebecker.com. And that's got, you know, just some little collective thoughts. You can get my 2 books. I have one book that I released last year with Hudson called The Ultimate Guide to Syncopation. It's just basically my floor plan of how to take Ted Reed Syncopation, take it out of the black and white mode, and add the Crayola 64 pack and add all the colors to it. And then I've got this cool book that I got to send you. It's Puzzles, Rhymes, and Riddles. And it's just like some 3 separate sections of building blocks for odd time and odd time phrasing, but also in even circumstances. And my DVD is still out. That's quite old now. That came out in 2011, but it's available, or 2012. It's available through Hudson as well. So those are good. And yeah, just keep pushing along.
Good stuff. Good stuff, Bruce. Well, again, you know, I thank you so much for your time and your expertise and everything that you've given us in the community, and everyone. You know, we got all the information on Bruce. Please check him out. I'm sure you already know about him, but he's a real treasure. Thanks so much, Bruce.
Thank you, Vinny. It's a really great hang with you, man. Love it. And thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode of Breakfast with Vinny.